So I'm actually going to slightly disagree with my learned colleague here, but let's just start. So I wanted to say I have an unusual first name. My first name is Williamson. Most people who are called Bill for their nickname, it's William, but I am actually called Williamson, and my name, Williamson, as a first name, goes back to colonial era, an ancestor of mine, colonial era Carolinas. And so people went eventually to Alabama and whatever. Now I'm in California. So I blame I'm a Carolinian in background. And then I wanted to say something about the ancestry of the Common Core. James Hunt, Jim Hunt, Governor Jim Hunt. So back in the mid-1990s, during one of the previous efforts to do this, he was a central figure in doing this. And he also, after the failure of the National History Standards, when it was voted down 99-1, he and Governor Roy Romer from Colorado, later to become head of the Democratic National Committee and later to also be head of the school system in Los Angeles, Governor Romer, they decided for tactical reasons they needed to, instead of having the national standards formally done by the federal government, they needed to have somebody else do them and then have the federal government put them into place and push them. And so they explicitly said this in public. So they thought about it, and Jim Hunt was one of the strategists. And the first meetings to put the Common Core into place took place in 2006 at the Hunt Institute, and then later Bob Wise, the former governor of West Virginia, who has an educational excellence group, he also got in, and then a Rockefeller Institute and so forth. And then, after they were pretty far along, they got the lobbying trade association policy arm of the governors and of the school officers, chief state school officers. So that's what's going on. So the first question to my mind, if I were a policymaker at a state level or a local level, would be, are these any good? Are they any good, and are they going to make a difference? So first, are they going to make a difference? Well, Tom Lovelace, who's a distinguished education policy analyst at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., looked at this, and other people have chimed in on it, but he did some pioneering work on it. And he said that the state standards have already given us what we're going to get in the way of school improvement by having standards. So when it comes to looking at what social scientists want to look at, which is reducing the classroom to classroom variation, how, are we getting enough out of the teachers, and what can we get out of that from having common standards? We've already gotten it by having state standards. So there's not going to be any surprise there. So now what if we look at countries? And this is something that Jim Sturgis mentioned, but I'm going to restate it. So the countries that do better than the United States, yeah, a lot of them have national standards. And the countries that do worse than the United States, they also have national standards. Why? Well, because we're an unusual country, right? This is part of American exceptionalism, that we have a decentralized system, that we have something as part of our constitutional organization called federalism. And many other countries are very hierarchical, very top-down. And so the countries that do better are that way, and the countries that do worse. So that's not going to say that having national standards is somehow going to improve things. And two countries that have even less centralization than the United States and are culturally quite similar to the United States, Australia and Canada, do not have national standards. Okay? Now, Canada, back in the 1970s, was mediocre in its science and math, as judged by the TIMSS, along with the United States. So we were mediocre. But Canada, which has no federal office of education, has no national ministry or national department of education, Canada has moved up to advanced. We're still tootling along as we get more and more centralized, but we're still mediocre. Okay, so that's another reason to believe this is not going to work. All right, so now how good are they? Can look at this from a couple of angles. Professor Milgram's citation of the fact that this would put us several years behind is there, and I would repeat it, but also one of the authors of the National Math Standards was a mathematician, Professor William McCollum of University of Arizona. So there were three people. There was Mr. Zimba, there was Phil Darrow, who was an English major, and there is this Professor McCollum. So what did he say in speaking before a group of research mathematicians? And I was there in the room. This is exactly what he said. And they're trying to wiggle out of it, but this is exactly what he said. The overall standards are, quote, not high, certainly not in comparison with other nations, including East Asia, where math education excels. Okay? So we're transforming and nationalizing our curriculum for something that's not very good. Great. Brilliant. Okay, so if you get into the detail, how much do we have in the way of problems? So I sat on the California Academic Standards Commission that reviewed these standards in 2010. And I had previously sat on the Standards Writing Commission back in the 1990s. So I knew this stuff pretty well. So I'm reading along in the English standards, and I see there's something funny about the way long and short vowels are being taught. So I call up one of the people that's on one of these advisory panels to the national standards, and I say, there's something odd about this. It just doesn't even look right. You're right. There's a mistake. But what can we do? 35 states have already adopted this, and it's put in final form, and it's been published. We can't correct this. So it's still there. So in statistics, there's a thing called the hypothesis of equality among sample means. Well, the way that they tell the teachers to do this is mathematically wrong. It's just plain wrong. Okay, but they don't know mechanism to fix this. It's in your state statutes, right? So congratulations, it's wrong. Okay, so now let's take something in geometry. So think about geometry. It's a very interlocked, architectonic, logical system. Okay, you have these theorems, and it all integrates. And a major thing that pervades it is similar and congruent triangles. So remember, you have this problem, you kind of decompose it, you take the different theorems, you figure out which parts of the theorems build together to solve this problem, and you line up your proofs, or at least in the olden pre-Common Core days, you used to do proofs. But anyway, so, and QED. All right. So a major part of this is similar and congruent triangles. And you may not use them every day in your own life, but somewhere in the back of your mind is side, angle, side. Angle, side, angle. Okay. So it resonates. You kind of, you could learn it again. You learned it once, you can learn it again. Well, they're not going to teach it that way. There are, as in a lot of things in mathematics, there are several different ways to do it. There's another way called rigid motion. And at research universities, for math majors in their junior year, they will learn this. It has never, ever been taught successfully in K-12 in the United States, in any state, in any county, in any city and town or school district in American history. And they're going to do it for the whole country, including the wonderful, beautiful state of North Carolina. Your teachers are not ready for this. It's going to be a mess. So you saw some great examples of the new math from the 1960s reborn in even uglier fashion. It was a complete catastrophe then. At that time, every publishing house, every textbook publishing house in the United States had a new math series that was what they were selling. In a few years, it completely collapsed. You've also heard references to the collapse of the George H.W. Bush era national standards and testing effort and 2 Clinton era efforts at it, one in each of his administrations. So the main thing is, if the parents and if a substantial number of the teachers don't like this, it will fall apart. It will be different in each state as to how that falling apart happens. It will be different at how this interacts with the national government, but it will fall apart if the public doesn't like it. And you are leaders of the public also, and you will feel this, but you can also interact and be part of it. Now, I want to say something about the Constitution, okay? And the fact that we have this federal system, and it gives us a certain amount of our liberty, because it's not just jurisdictional boundaries and so forth. And yes, there are 50 states, and yes, there's the federal government in 50 states, and yes, there are the counties, and there are the functional districts like sewage districts and water districts and school districts and so forth. But it's not just boundaries. There's also value to our liberty and our representative government from this, because you can move between jurisdictions if you feel that you're being burdened or you're being imposed on. You can match better the policies to voter preferences. You can make experiments and innovations and so forth. You lose that if you have a national monopoly. You lose that. You close the door on innovation. Innovations in American public education have not come from the national government. Sometimes they, we'll come to the head of the crowd, right? But they haven't done really anything. So what I want to say is the rationale, and here's where I might have a slight disagreement with my colleague, who makes mainly completely sound points, but the belief of the people that put this in is that if you don't have a national leader telling everybody what to do, everything will go to the lowest possible level. There'll be a race to the bottom. This is their belief. So they believe that this is true for clean water and for clean air and for workplace conditions and safety and whatever, all these things. And they also believe it for education. It's not empirically true. It's not factually true. Okay, so there have been a number of things, law review articles and stuff reviewing this. This is a full book on the subject called The New Federalism, Can the States Be Trusted?, edited by 2 prominent political scientists, John Fairjohn and Barry Weingast, 2 incredibly important figures. And this is about the concept in political science of competitive federalism. And the point of competitive federalism is this. Because you can move from one jurisdiction to another to find what you want, some people will do this at the margins. So in the Boston metropolitan area, you've got Boston and you've got all the different towns around, okay? So at the same income level, you can move to a different place that better matches what you want. Whereas in the Miami area, so Florida has county, well, the school districts are counties, and they're big in Florida, okay? Or in the Los Angeles area, Los Angeles has a gigantic school district that's bigger than the city of Los Angeles. It also takes in some surrounding communities. It's very hard at the same income level to move to a different place. You're trapped in this monopoly. The feature of competitive federalism is defeated by this jurisdictional design that's there. What you're losing is you're losing this ability of competitive federalism. And you can see it. Yes, there is, as was being stated, an effort by people who are the deliverers of public education to do as little as they can get away with and take as much money as possible. That dynamic is there. But there are also countering pressures. So the legislators and the members of the governor's staff and the governor want to be able to say, I was an education leader. When they run, or when their history gets written, or they're written up in Wikipedia, they want to say, I improved education, okay? I was an education governor, right? I made my state attractive to people who wanted to move to a different state. I made it attractive for businesses to move here. We have an educated workforce, a vibrant, interesting workforce. We have, your executives can go somewhere where people are cultured and are civically involved and so forth. There's a counter, this tendency that people, the reason they called it race to the top, because they believe, the people who are for these national standards, that without either a cartel of the states or federal government being directly, they believe in a cartel of the states led by the federal government and policed by the federal government. In all this, we are in complete accord that they believe this. But I also believe it doesn't happen that way necessarily. When you have vibrant competitive federalism, and it's not always easy to have vibrant, okay, and the doctrines of progressive education have made the school boards emasculated and taken over by the bureaucracy. There's a lot of problems, but they have made, by making a national monopoly and locking it in, they made it much, much worse and taken away a pressure and a way that we can have excellent public schools by giving it this national monopoly. So I close with that. Thank you.